Hi there, I'm Tim Welch, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about a religion called Buddhism. So before I jump in, I want to give a quick background on who I am and my goals in presenting this to you. So first off, as a quick caveat, I am not a Buddhist myself, and so everything I say should be taken a bit with a grain of salt, because as a Buddhist, it's an outside perspective that may or may not perfectly match on to the lived experience of someone who is a Buddhist. So take it with a grain of salt, just as somebody who is a Christian may not want a non-Christian trying to explain the religion. The same too could be said of somebody who is a Buddhist as well. With that said, a bit of my background on it. When I was an undergrad, I had the privilege of giving the curriculum for the study of Buddhism in the Religions of Mankind class, and I've also taken a class in Asian philosophy and read a variety of books on the topic of Buddhism. With that said, my goal in presenting this to you today is not to convert you to Buddhism or even convince you of the veracity of it. My goal is solely to expose you to a new way of seeing things that I think could potentially be beneficial or helpful to you. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide what you believe, how you believe it, and whether or not this makes sense for you. Even if you reject it, it can still give you an alternative way or a bigger way, kind of expanding your understanding of how to view things. So with that said, let's get started talking just a little bit about Buddhism. So I've shared my screen with you, so you hopefully can see the PowerPoint I've set up. Now, obviously, it'd be completely impossible to cover the entirety of Buddhism within a 10-minute framework. So rather than that, I'll quickly cover three central parts of Buddhism. This is just called the three marks of existence. And so we'll begin with it. So first off, when you hear the word mark, reflect on yourself. What does that mean? What comes to your head when you hear that? For me, it means something that explains or shows what existence is. It's something that you'd put to show this is what's going on, this is what's happening. So in Buddhism, there are three marks. I'll quickly go through what they mean and then go in depth just a little bit later on each of them. So the first is anicca, means that all being is transitory. Everything is in a state of flux or constantly changing. The second is anatta, also called anatmin, which means that all being is impermanent. And the third one is dukkha, which is typically translated as suffering, but as I hope you'll see from this, there's actually a much more profound meaning to it. So let's keep going. So the first is anicca. What it literally means is inconstant or impermanent. So I think a great way of learning things is to know the etymology or the word origin of it. So the first is nika, which means constant. The next part is the prefix a, which means without. So without constants, without permanence. So it's the basic idea that everything is changing. Nothing lasts forever. Nothing stays the same. So you can kind of think back to that famous Kansas song, Dust in the Wind. All we are is dust in the wind. The idea of everything is changing and nothing remains the same forever. Now, at first blush, this might seem almost terrifying. It might even seem kind of depressing to say, wow, nothing remains the same. That's terrible. But Pema Chodron, a famous convert to Buddhism, says, impermanence is a principle of harmony. When we don't struggle against it, we are in harmony with reality. So I want to offer to you a way why that's not bad. So part of it you can see as the change of seasons. You have a leaf that falls from the ground and then falls and turns to soil. If that didn't happen, if it stayed forever, you wouldn't have the process of birth and rebirth, whether you're seeing literally or in a metaphorical sense of the transition from one part to another part. Another way is, imagine if you can reflect back on your teenage angsty self. When I was young, I had a Zanga and I posted all kinds of ridiculous, horrible, and embarrassing angsty teen poetry that I hope you did as well, or perhaps some emo photos on MySpace. Think to how you are now, 5, 10 years, 20 years later. Do you really want to be that same person as you were 10 years ago? Do you really wish that things could be completely the same as they are then? Hopefully not. The fact that things change allows things to grow, to become better. Conversely, things can get worse as well. But the main point of this is not that change is either good or that change is bad, but just saying that change is. That the only thing in life that is constant is impermanence. When you recognize that fact, you can see that it's neither good nor bad, just an intrinsic facet or a mark of existence. So that's the idea behind anicca. The second one is called anatman. It's a little bit harder to wrap your mind around. It's pretty easy to say, okay, nothing lasts forever, everything changes, sure, whatever, that's fine and dandy. But okay, applying this to yourself to say that no being or no permanent beings exist in the world, that's in a sense saying that there is no self. Now on this, there's some dispute on if anatta and on atman are two different things. It's basically just the Pali word and the Sanskrit word for them. So for the point of this discussion, we'll say anatman or anatta are interchangeable. It means on, without, and then atman. Atman means the self, means who you are. So it means without self. So this is pretty hard to think, but just for a moment, reflect and think, who are you? The first thing that comes to your head is probably your name. Well, I am this, which obviously begs the question, if you had a different name, would you be a different person? But taking it a step further than that is ask yourself, where is yourself located? Most people point to kind of a spot between their eyes, or most people point to kind of some place in the back of the eye, the recesses of the consciousness. But ask yourself, as I was alluding to earlier, are you the same person that you were 10 years ago? Physically, there's the idea, and I don't know if it's entirely true, but it's a good illustration, that every 7 years, all of the cells in our bodies change. So from a physicalist perspective, every aspect of who we are physically changes over time. So in that sense, there is no physical continuity between who you are 10 years ago and who you are now. Likewise, your consciousness, your beliefs, your values, all those are subject to changing as well. So consider the phrases we have in our language. He's a new person. She's a changed woman. He's been born again. Or consider this other phrase we have of somebody who has committed a crime and says, I'm not the same person I was back then. Now we use this metaphorically, but it's at least not possible. There's a literal bit more to that than simply saying that it's just a turn of phrase. And so Buddhism takes it further and says, yeah, there really is no self. And unfortunately, this is quite a complex subject, and it's one that the different traditions of Buddhism, both Mahayana, Theravada, Zen Buddhism, etc., have different understandings of what this means. So I can't delve in it too much, just want to give you the idea of it's possible that who you are changes over time, and there isn't a strict continuity between the past, the present, and the future, which can seem terrifying because you think I'm not grounded, but it can also be liberating to say you're not constrained by the past and constrained by what has happened to you, but rather what you will do and what you can do. So let me use a sort of metaphor that can be very helpful for understanding it. So who here has gone to one of the MSU games? Hopefully all of you have, or at some point will. They're a lot of fun to go to. If you haven't gone to MSU one, check out another football game. And even if you haven't gone, you can probably still relate to this. So this is something I got from Dr. Marty Heights, who taught Asian philosophy at Oklahoma State University, where I got my undergrad. He calls this Dave the Stadium Wave. So Dave the Wave, all of you have seen a stadium wave. When you think about it, is Dave real? Is there really a stadium wave? So we could spend an entire day talking about it. In fact, in Asian philosophy, we did. But if you say he is real, how is it real? What does that mean to say that there's a stadium wave that's moving across that exists? Because on the one hand, you really just have hundreds or thousands of people moving up and down in synchrony to give the appearance of continuity. But when you break it down, just like with a real wave or with a stadium wave, there's actually just individual people standing up and sitting down. So what does that mean if it's real or not real? Quick summary for the sake of brevity is that there appears to be horizontal movement, but really it's only people moving up and down in synchronization. And that gives the illusion of a wave. Now, to be sure, you can't deny the appearance of it. An illusion means that it looks like it's there, and just because you know an illusion is an illusion, it doesn't mean that it disappears and you can no longer see it. And this is true of Dave the Wave. And likewise, Buddhism says this is true as well of yourself. Now they go even deeper and talk about what's called the 5 skandhas, the 5 heaps, or the 5 aggregates. They talk about 5 different parts that give the impression of there being a continuity of self. But they say that when you look at all the 5 parts, there's nothing remaining, there's nothing left, and there is no core self. That's something that's a little hard to swallow the first time you hear it. So I'm not going to shove it down your throat, but just give you a chance to pause and reflect on it. I'm going to give you a chance, I mean, online. We're going to move on to the next topic for the sake of brevity. So I wish I would have prepared more and not put those little marks in then, but transitions are difficult, even though transitions, according to Buddhism, are everything. So next one is dukkha. Dukkha is I think, best translated as unsatisfactoriness or not enoughness. However, most of the time it's usually translated as suffering, which begets almost a sense of Buddhism as being nihilism, as saying Life is meaningless, life is suffering, life is pain. Almost like Wesley in the Princess Bride, life is pain, that's all there is to it. Buddhism isn't quite that pessimistic. But so I want to direct you, if you can see my mouse, to the three words on the screen, dukkha, sukha, and anatta. To have this in a triangle, because dukkha and sukha are a contrast with one another. They're simple antonyms. You can go deeper into the etymology of it. But dukkha basically means bitterness, and sukha, where we get the word sweetness, think sucrose, means sweetness. So you've got sukha, which is sweetness, and then dukkha, which is bitterness. So it's almost saying life is bitter. Life is twinged with just a bit of bitterness in there. And then as Buddhism is the middle path, the path between the two extremes, I have likewise put the middle path between them, which is ananda, which means bliss. So we'll go a little bit more into dukkha, and then we'll end the day on those three marks of existence. So there are actually three different kinds of dukkha. I'm going to focus on two of the three, and it says that anything that is not permanent is dukkha, and as you can see, if everything is impermanent, it would follow then, at least logically, that everything is therefore dukkha. Happiness is dukkha, success is dukkha, wealth, fame, fortune, pure bliss is dukkha. Now this doesn't mean that happiness is bad, it just means don't cling to happiness. It means that everything is changing, so even when you have a moment of happiness, there's perhaps a small part of you in the back of your mind or the recesses of your consciousness that says, I wish this could last forever. So even when you're having a happy moment, there's still an element of sadness to it in that you know it won't last forever. And so before I get to that last part, imagine, if you will, the first day of summer camp. It's the end of the night, you're lying in bed and you're thinking, wow, I can't wait for this week to get going. And all the fun I'm going to have, the people I'm going to meet, and the canoeing, the archery, the whatever it is you do at summer camp. It could be computer camp, it could be volleyball camp, it could be cheerleading camp, whatever. You think this is so great. But maybe if you're like me, you kind of reflect a bit. And as you're lying there in bed, trying to fall asleep, you think, man, just think in 5 days, I, whatever that is, will be sitting here lying in the same bed, thinking that this is over. And I'll be sitting there, lying there rather sad that this is past. And so even though I'm sitting here, lying here, thinking this is great and wonderful, there's an element of bitterness, of knowing that it's not going to last forever, but wishing I could cling and make it happen, which is an allusion to part of the Four Noble Truths, which is a topic for another day if you are so inclined. So the other kind of dukkha is the dukkha of conditioned experience. In Buddhism, everything is conditioned. Nothing exists unto itself or in of itself. There's this idea of interdependent being. When this arises, that arises. When this falls, that falls. That nothing can exist in a state by itself completely, which is a bit where that anatta or anatman comes from, the idea of there is no self, because who you are is made up of so many different constituent components and parts that when you break it down, there is no core thing left there. So you can do this in multiple ways. One, you can say that you're dependent upon your parents. A wolf is dependent upon deer, deer upon grass, grass upon the sunlight, and so forth and so on, such that everything contains the elements of everything else within itself. But you could also just view it as the sense of all of your atoms, all of what you are, actually came from the stars, quite literally the sun. Whenever whenever a sun explodes in a supernova, what happens is the carbon of the elements in those atoms get thrown about into the cosmos, and over time they condense, and so all the carbon in our body, because all life is carbon-based, actually comes from the star. So in a sense, we are quite literally, at least according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, a very famous astrophysicist, stardust. So even who we are physically exists within the stars, exists within space, yet exists within here. So obviously I'm going beyond my time and going beyond what you can really digest in a quick 10-minute time. But just to give you a bit of a flavor of some of the ideas of Buddhism, that's what it kind of means to say everything is dependent on something else, the idea of interdependence, which actually there's a whole topic called the doctrine of dependent origination, which is a whole topic for another day as well. But for a quick recap, or one more thing, is the idea of conditioned states is the idea that there's always that subtle gap between what you hope will be and what is, between the ideal and the actual, and that perpetual presence of that gap is a bit of what dukkha is that sense of suffering, that sense of unsatisfactoriness, that sense of not enoughness, of not quite enoughness. Summary, you have the three marks of existence. You have anicca, the idea of impermanence, nothing lasts forever. The idea of anatman, that no self is permanent. an idea of dukkha, that because of this, everything is a state of unsatisfactoriness or not enoughness. So I'm going to end there because my computer is also on the verge of dying. If I can find myself again with a funny turn of phrase when talking about Buddhism. And then we'll call it a day. Oh, stop share, that's how you do it. So hello, here I am again. Hope you've enjoyed this talk. I apologize for going over the limit. I hope you have enticed you to learn a little more about Buddhism, or at least to think more about what it is you believe, and of course, who you are as well. So until next time.